Fiona takes an ogre's form. Love's true form is a possessive. The form belongs to the love, the same way the king's crown belongs to the king. The curse names who owns the form, and it's not Fiona. And here's the thing, I'm not the first one who found this. It's been independently noticed on Movie Chat, Film Boards, TV Tropes, Quora, and Screen Rant. A Movie Chat user put it plainly years ago. Her true love was Shrek the ogre, so her true form became an ogre. Screen Rant stated that their first kiss would lead her to take the form of her true love. And TV Tropes' Wild Mass Guessing page says it directly. Fiona's true form is not an ogre. She is born a human, but cursed to become an ogre at night. She takes on the form of an ogre after kissing Shrek because, well, take love's true form, anyone. It's sitting right there in the spell, but the film doesn't frame it that way. The music swells and the crowd erupts. The whole scene is designed to feel like an arrival, not a transformation into someone else's shape. It trains you to process it as self-discovery. The most celebrated moment in Shrek's history, the scene that launched 1,000 body positivity blog posts, rests on audience hearing a word that isn't there. Her true form. The curse says loves, and loves changes everything. Now, okay, you might be...
How's it going?
Thinking, interesting grammar quirk, but that's just one line. Maybe the writers just picked a poetic phrasing and didn't mean it literally. If that's your instinct, Shrek 2 is about to prove the mechanism works exactly the way the grammar says it does. Shrek 2 gives us 3 separate pieces of evidence. Any one of them is interesting on its own. Together, they're hard to walk away from. Let's start with the thing the film casually drops and moves on from. Fiona was born fully human. Her father, King Harold, was originally a frog. The fairy godmother's magic turned him human so he could marry Queen Lillian. Fiona was their child, born human, cursed later as a little girl by a witch. Shrek 2 reveals that both of Princess Fiona's parents are indeed human, making her originally a full-blooded human too. This means that her ogre side was purely the result of the curse. The ogre form wasn't hiding inside her, waiting to emerge. Rather, it was imposed from outside. The true self-interpretation requires that Fiona's authentic identity as a form she was never born with, one that contradicts her biology and only exists because a witch's spell put it there. That's a strange definition of true self. Now, here is where it gets harder to ignore. The fairy godmother's entire Shrek 2 scheme depends on controlling who kisses Fiona. She struck a deal with Harold, turned him human so he could marry Lillian, and in exchange their daughter would marry her son, Prince Charming. Harold then had Fiona locked in a dragon-guarded tower, specifically so Charming would be the one to rescue and kiss her. The film tells you this in its own opening narration. Prince Charming recounts the plan himself.
They sought the help of a fairy godmother, who had them lock the young princess away in a tower, there to await the kiss of the handsome Prince Charming.
And that's the film's own framing of why Fiona was locked away. But hold the phone.
Hold the phone?
Why would the fairy godmother care who reaches the tower if the curse just revealed a predetermined true self? If Fiona was always going to become an ogre regardless of who kissed her, the rescuer's identity doesn't matter. Let anyone climb the tower, who cares? Harold answers this himself. When he first sees Shrek and Fiona arrive at the palace, he whispers,
"Wasn't she supposed to kiss Prince Charming and break the spell?"
That's the man who built the tower telling you the expected output. The kisser was the variable. He expected a different result because he expected a different input. Her backup plan, a love potion to force Fiona to fall in love with Charming, exists for the same reason. The identity of the kisser determines the outcome. Her whole political strategy falls apart if it doesn't. She she's trying to control an input. When she finds out the wrong person got there first, she says exactly what you'd expect.
He climbs to the highest bloody room of the tallest bloody tower. And what does he find? Some gender-confused wolf telling him that his princess is already married.
She's not upset that Fiona is unhappy. She's upset that the mechanism received the wrong input. And then there's Harold himself. Harold was a frog. Lillian loved him. The fairy godmother's magic turned him human permanently. The form he locked into matched his lover's species. When Shrek kissed Fiona, she locked into ogre form. The kiss reshapes. The template is the partner. There's a popular fan theory that the fairy godmother herself was the witch who originally cursed Fiona. Shrek Forever After provides circumstantial evidence for this. If that holds, it adds another layer. She designed the curse knowing what Charming's kiss would produce. A permanently human Fiona, marriageable into royalty. Shrek arriving first is the wrench in the works. The curse worked as designed, it just received the wrong input. I genuinely don't know if the filmmakers intended this connection. The franchise never confirms it, but even without it, the evidence stands. The curse is a mold, not...
I just take pictures of them.
What do you mean you just take pictures?
I have this app that you can take a picture of any book, and then it reads it to you at any speed. As I sit here with one foot on either side of the edge looking out the tall
mirror. The screenwriters saw this problem also, and they tried to fix it, but the studio said no. Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, in a 2001 creative screenwriting interview, were asked directly, doesn't the film inherently say ugly people belong with ugly people? And Rossio acknowledged it. He said the ending they wanted was one where Shrek would love her in all of her varied forms. That wasn't a defense of the permanent transformation, it was an argument against it. Their preference was for the shape-shifting itself to be Fiona's true form, both human and ogre together. Elliot said it outright. The answer we wanted to give was her true form is beauty by day and ugly by night. That's her true form, and she was trying to rid herself of part of who she truly was. They even rebranded the concept, calling her an enchanted princess instead of a shape-shifting one, just to get the studio to stop pushing back. It didn't work. They pitched revisiting it in a sequel. Rossio said, we tried again there, but nobody would have anything of it. DreamWorks removed them from the Shrek 2 project. Just think about that. The writers of Shrek wanted Fiona to keep both forms. They fought for it, and they lost. Elliot also wanted her ogre form to look like her own thing, not built off of Shrek's design, but something distinctly hers, and that got overridden too. The final design makes Fiona look like a green-skinned counterpart to Shrek. She doesn't become her own kind of ogre, she becomes his kind of ogre. The creators fought to change the ending. The studio overruled them, and for 25 years, the romantic framing held. But the curse is still there, saying exactly what it always said. Let's go back to the transformation, because Fiona's reaction tells you everything. Shrek bursts into the cathedral, tells Fiona that Farquaad is only marrying her to become king. Fiona looks at the setting sun. She reveals her ogre form to the entire congregation, and Farquaad recoils in disgust.
Oh, it's disgusting! Guards! Guards!
Farquaad is subdued. Shrek and Fiona face each other.
I love you.
Really?
Really, really.
I love you too.
They kiss. The spell activates. Fiona is lifted into the air, and the ethereal voices repeat the final clause. She's lowered to the ground, still an ogre, and this is her immediate response.
I'm supposed to be beautiful.
She expected the curse to restore her human form. She says so. She doesn't say, I thought I'd stay an ogre, or I'm confused about which form is mine. She says she was supposed to be beautiful. The grammar of someone who just watched a promise break. She expected restoration, but she got replacement. Now, I'm not saying Shrek is some villain here. His love for her is definitely real, but functionally what we're watching is him redefine her reality right after she lost control of her own body. She did not choose this form. A curse imposed by someone else, activated by someone else's kiss, reshaped her permanently. And the man who triggered it tells her to be happy about it. The crowd applauds, the music swells, and the audience files it under self-acceptance. Now, the strongest counter-argument to everything I've laid out is Shrek 2. At the end of that film, the happily ever after potion has turned both Shrek and Fiona human. Shrek offers to kiss her before midnight to make it permanent, and Fiona stops him. She says,
I want what any princess wants. To live happily ever after with the ogre I married.
They let midnight pass. They revert to ogre form. That's a genuine choice, and I won't pretend it isn't. Fiona actively refused a human body to stay with Shrek. But look at what that choice actually is. She's choosing between two forms, both imposed by magic. The happily ever after potion didn't restore her birth form any more than the curse revealed her true one. The choice was real. Both options were enchantments. And then there's the version of Fiona we see in Shrek Forever After's alternate timeline. Nobody rescued her. She broke herself out of the tower. That Fiona is a warrior leading an ogre resistance. She's the only version of Fiona in the entire franchise with full agency, and it's for exactly one reason. Nobody kissed her. No one else's magic decided what she would become. Anyway, the deepest irony here is that the conformity take doesn't diminish Shrek. It sharpens it. The movie's actual subversion was never ugly as beautiful. It was showing how fairy tale machinery works on women. A curse designed by someone else, a tower chosen by someone else, a rescue performed by someone else, a kiss initiated by someone else, a form determined by someone else. Fiona moves through the entire plot as the object of competing claims. Farquaad's political claim, Shrek's contractual claim, the dragon's custodial claim, and the curse is the final mechanism of that pattern, reshaping her body to match whichever claim prevails. The film knows this. There's a scene where Shrek overhears Fiona saying, "Who could ever love a beast so hideous and ugly?" and thinks she's talking about him. That's the movie's thesis in miniature.
Who could ever love a beast so hideous and ugly? Princess and ugly don't go together. That's why I can't stay here with Shrek. My only chance to live happily ever after is to marry my true love.
She's talking about herself. He hears it as being about him. And 25 years of viewers do the same thing with the curse. They hear her true form. And the text says, love's true form. The listener rewrites the words to fit the story they want to believe. The screenwriters knew this was there. They tried to write their way out of it, and the studio said no. DreamWorks preferred the beautiful lie. But 25 years later, the curse is still right there. 4 words. Take love's true form. Not yours, but love's. And drop your theory on this one in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. And thank you so much for watching. And click here where I prove that Ratatouille's Gusteau was a fraud and that his entire legacy was built on a lie.
Coinbase continues to be the safest, most secure place to hold and trade your cryptocurrency. USD deposits and withdrawals are operating as normal. If you need to move funds on or off,
eventually, we will see Mascot Horror die off. Well, I called it. Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's been overthinking Mascot Horror for the last 12 years. You know, it's funny. This channel was started by applying math and science to retro video games, but as time went on, we began to use our massive brains to break down the stories hidden within haunted animatronics and old abandoned locations from our childhood. So I always understood when we would get comments saying, I miss the math and science episodes, or I miss the industry discussions, or they only talk about indie horror now. To be clear, we still do those science episodes, it just wasn't as much as we used to, and last year I made a concerted effort to do more than I did in my first year as host. Hence, I created this green screen format. What I wasn't expecting was some of the comments I saw on our last one of these meta videos about the console wars that said, where are the lore theories? Where's the Mascot Horror? Just goes to show you can't put them all. But as I read those comments, I did realise they might actually be onto something. I mean, just look here. These are all the videos we covered on this channel in my first year as the host of Game Theory. Now, take a look at year 2. Do you see a difference? Obviously, there's shifts in thumbnails and that sort of thing, but the big one is that there was way less Mascot Horror, and the ones we did cover were franchises that we've covered before. Snack, Poppy, and Welcome Home Giggleland. There was basically nothing in the realm of original Mascot Horror. That feels odd, right? To be clear, I'm specifically talking about mascot horror, not indie horror in general, the stuff with colourful mascots and nostalgic locations. So I decided to take a look at some of our peers in the space to see if they'd been covering stuff that had just somehow slipped past me. Your Dorcos, 8-Bit Ryans, Super Horror Bro, you know, the usual suspects. But even looking at their videos, the same pattern emerged. Outside of established franchises or fan games, gone were the colourful mascots from nostalgic locations, usually involving dead children or employees. This absolute juggernaut of YouTube indie gaming had almost felt like it disappeared overnight. Now everyone was covering indie horror games that led into the PS1 style of graphics that we talked about last time. So what happened? Where did all the mascot horror go? And is the genre gone for good, or much like the characters in the games themselves, will it rise again from the dead? Well, loyal theorists, you know by now, often to figure out the future, we have to look at the past. I want to pick mascot horror apart from the seams to discover exactly what happened to this once renowned genre. Let's take a journey down memory lane to look at the origins of the genre through its golden age, to figure out what made it popular to begin with, what caused its recent downfall, and if there is any hope left for the genre that continues to haunt my nightmares. When you think of where mascot horror started, you probably think of the obvious answer, FNAF. But actually, that wasn't the beginning of the genre. It may be what we all recognize today, but the fact is a lot of other franchises have been laying the groundwork for mascot horror decades before FNAF was even a sparkle in Scott Cawthon's eye. Let me draw your attention to this short story by E.T.A. Hoffman, The Sandman. In it, a student falls in love with a lifelike animatronic woman. At the end of the story, he sees her pulled apart and realizes he's been dating a living doll. What is especially traumatizing for him is seeing her eyes torn from her head, mirroring his childhood bedtime story, The Sandman, where a sleep spirit would pluck the eyes from kids refusing to sleep. Now, obviously, this isn't a mascot horror. It's kind of missing the crucial name element. But it is clearly laying the groundwork for creepy stories involving animatronics and unsettling childhood memory. And this was all the way back in 1816. Over the next century, we saw more stories like this continue to blaze a trail within the horror genre. Like in the 1920s, we got Rossum's Universal Robots. You probably haven't heard about this play unless you're a fan of obscure theatre from the early 1900s, but it literally coined the term robots. In it, a factory makes these robot workers out of artificial flesh and blood. But by the end of the show, these workers lead a rebellion and kill every single person in the factory. Sounds familiar, right? In 1962, an episode of The Twilight Zone came out called The Dummy, featuring a ventriloquist doll taking over his performer. In 1988, we got a story about a murderer possessing a toy in Child's Play. And in 1991, we had a creepy clown scaring kids in It. Chucky and Pennywise are two of the most recognizable characters in all of horror history, and they're deeply tied to the corruption of childhood nostalgia. But while they've become mascots in their own right, they're not really mascots by definition. It's not until Silent Hill 3 in 2003 where a game features something I would identify as uniquely mascot-based horror. There's an amusement park level featuring a character called Robbie the Rabbit that added an unsettling ambiance to the amusement park level. It's not the main point of the game, but this is where the dominoes really begin to fall. In the 2010s, we get a lot of media attempting to corrupt our childhood favorites. Creepypastas were blowing up at this time, and those influences began to seep into the world of video games too. We got creepypastas like Lavender Town Syndrome or the release of Sonic.exe, and they showed us that gaming and mascot-based horror was an inevitable part of the cultural zeitgeist. These things eventually culminated in the game that widely is considered the final setup piece for FNAF's rise to power. A video game about one of the creepiest creepypastas out there, Slender. Slenderman was a creepypasta from 2009, 3 years before the game, so there was already some nostalgia building up from internet users. But he also is a character closely tied to children, with some of the original photos placing him in nostalgic childhood locations like play parks. You combine that with horror game elements like those from Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and suddenly all those things combine to create a phenomenon that took 2012 YouTube by storm. Everything had built up over the centuries to lead to this moment. But much like Pennywise or Chucky, while Slenderman has become a bit of a mascot for indie horror, he wasn't a mascot himself. But then, the game we've all been waiting for came onto the scene and added the final piece to the puzzle.
Dude, so I use my phone's screen time blocker, but I always just end up ignoring it.
I use Opal, so the apps are really locked.
I really want to focus, but Instagram Reels.
FNAF exploded onto the scene on August 8th, 2014. It had everything we'd expect at this point. It had a very simple gameplay loop. You're a security guard and all you do is sit in your security room, check the security cams while closing the doors and flickering the flashlight here and there. It's honestly a little bit reminiscent of point-and-click games from the 90s. In a world filled of complicated, open-world, 40-hour-long epic games, FNAF was something that you could pick up after a long day of work or school without feeling like you've forgotten the whole plot of the game. It also had a cryptic story told through tiny details that only a small percentage of people would find in any given playthrough. It was full of jump scares, and you remember that Chuck E. Cheese that you went to as a kid, right? What if those animatronics were the thing trying to kill you? And it was run by a mad scientist murder robot maker guy that murdered a bunch of children who are now possessing those animatronics. Talk about ruining your childhood. But the final piece that it had above things like Slender was the namesake of this whole thing. The mascots. Freddy and the gang were brightly coloured, so they stood out. They had simple silhouettes, so you could easily recognise them. And while they were definitely creepy in that uncanny way that we remember from our childhoods, they weren't inherently scary to look at in the way that horror monsters were before. In a weird way, they were actually kind of cute. Though all those things combined to make them perfect for platforms like YouTube. The bright colours and strong silhouettes meant they stood out in thumbnails. The lack of gore meant YouTube wasn't going to flag it. And throw in its custom modes and challenges, giving it massive replay value, and that it's pretty darn cheap compared to the insanely priced AAA gaming scene, it feels kind of obvious that audiences and creators alike would fall in love with this thing. Creators were making so much FNAF content, which essentially became free advertising perpetuating it further. So, Scott made a follow-up. And another. And another, with YouTubers continuing to cover the series in between releases, which kept the hype cycle going. And then you throw theorizing about the story into the mix and suddenly a juggernaut was born. Now, I will say yes, there are a lot of other reasons why FNAF took off, including a bunch of business things that most people don't think about. I do have another video planned to focus specifically on that, so make sure you're subscribed to see when that drops. But for what we're talking about today, I think we covered the important bits. It mastered all the pieces building up to it, and those cute, kid-friendly mascots were the cherry on top that led to it being a massive success. Not just as a game either, but as a commercial enterprise. Simple character designs meant merch sales. Confusing lore meant Scott could release books, spin-off games, and movies, and the fans would buy in. Plus, it inspired a whole generation of future developers. Its simple but effective gameplay that could basically run on a potato led to hundreds, if not thousands, of fan games. And while some of them were a little rough around the edges, it was clear that fans of the genre wanted more. More twisted nostalgia, more loss of innocence, and more survival horror.
I fucking knew it. I knew it. This girl's claiming to be reading 7 books a week. All the while she's sitting here listening to Speechify like some sort of kindergarten.
FNAF opened up the mascot horror door, although the term mascot horror wouldn't actually be coined until 4 years later by fellow creator John Wolfe, who I know watches these videos. Hi John, hope you're enjoying this one. Anyway, at the time, it was all just kind of indie horror, but either way, other indie devs took notice and started to take those core elements that FNAF established and innovated upon them, building out the genre with their own unique games. In 2016, we got Hello Neighbor's first alphas, a game designed with a simple gameplay loop where an AI would learn the ways you broke into his house and alter his tactics accordingly. Now, as much as we like to dog on this game for the fact it leant really hard into the lore after Game Theory started making videos about it, it did have an intriguing lore premise from the very beginning. A creepy neighbor with something locked in his basement. That's something I'm sure some of us recognize from our childhoods, looking over the fence at the weird neighbor and imagining the worst, but it's intriguing. That same year, we got Tattletale, a game where you walk around your house trying to keep your creepy Furby happy while being hunted by a bigger, creepier Furby. Again, twisting that childhood memory of toys and Christmas, but this time adding in a demonic element rather than possession. In 2017, we got Bendy and the Ink Machine, which spoofed old-school 1930s cartoons like Mickey Mouse and Bimbo. You once again find yourself in a nostalgic location filled with demonic symbols, but this time the employees are the ones who have been turned into distorted versions of the mascots that are now trying to kill you. And all of these games allowed you to do something crazy in the eyes of FNAF. You could walk, something that even FNAF has now adopted in recent years. Although the style of walking simulator that most modern mascot horrors follow is much more akin to Bendy than the other two. Plus, Bendy also introduced the chapter system. Rather than release multiple full games in a year, they would just release sections of a full game, allowing them to keep up the pace, allowing you to walk through different environments each chapter, and simplifying the story to one cohesive story rather than a bunch of smaller stories that tie together. Later that year, we got Duck Season, a VR mascot horror experience where the dog character from Duck Hunt was actually a real guy in a costume just trapped inside a video game. In 2018, we got The Dark Deception, where you're trapped in a purgatory-like hotel maze filled with demonic creatures chasing you down. On the coattails of indie horror games like Doki Doki Literature Club, we got Cooking Companions, which mixed the ideas of creepy visual novels with adorable mascots in 2021. And at the same time, we got what is arguably the second biggest mascot horror series behind FNAF, Poppy Playtime. Love it or hate it, this thing made waves, mostly because it figured out all of the tropes that came before it and honed them. It used chase sequences which bounce off things like Hello Neighbor and The Dark Deception. It's based in a toy factory full of toys that feel reminiscent of the toys that we grew up with. And it just keeps going. It has the evil science experiment of FNAF, but rather than dead kids possessing these toys, the kids were turned into toys. And of course, the lore was being slowly hinted over the course of several chapters, books, spin-offs, and ARGs to keep up the hype, like with FNAF, Bendy, Hello Neighbor, and many more.
Always wanted to learn Japanese? Start today with Busu, with bite-sized lessons suitable for all levels.
2021 to 2022 was kind of the peak of mascot horror in some senses. After Poppy Playtime, we had games come out of the woodwork like Andy's Apple Farm, Amanda the Adventurer, Choo Choo Charles, and My Friendly Neighborhood. All games that found unique ways to tell their stories and play on that childhood nostalgia. Sure, they weren't all perfect games, but is any game really perfect? Especially when these games were produced by indie developers who don't have the multi-million-dollar backing of AAA studios. The problem was there was now so many different franchises, it was hard to keep innovating, especially when franchises like FNAF, Bendy, and Poppy were still going and releasing new stuff. And to be fair, this is 7+ years from the inception of mascot horror. It's understandable that the market starts to feel a little stagnant, and some might even say oversaturated. It's hard to come up with something new when everything has been done before. This is where you'd kind of expect the genre to die out. You get stale, so people leave. But that was far from the case. People were loving this genre. FNAF was in the process of being made into a real movie, and people were hyped. They couldn't get enough. And for that hubris, we were punished. Because a new franchise was about to burst onto the scene, and it made quite a splash, but for the wrong reasons. Rather than innovating on the tropes or gameplay, adding new or interesting mechanics, or switching up the story, this game doubled down on those tropes. It was a basic kids location that was even larger and more nonsensical than Poppy. It had missing kids, an evil corporation doing experiments, monsters whose motivations were ambiguous in the worst way, clunky dialogue, low quality voice acting, and to top it all off, they took the idea of simple, colourful mascots with identifiable silhouettes and turned it up to the nth degree. To the point they feel lazy and bland rather than intriguing. I'm of course talking about the one, the only, Garten of Banban. They released new chapters even faster than we thought humanly possible, but they did so at clearly the lowest quality possible. That wasn't even the worst part though. It was pretty bad, don't get me wrong, but the worst part was that you could tell that the game was made not out of passion, but purely out of profit. With a merge page right on the front page of their first installment, hoping to get a huge amount of revenue just because it's a mascot horror game. Sadly, they were successful. The game got super popular and probably made them a butt ton of money. If FNAF was the one opening the door to mascot horror, Banban opened the freaking floodgates. People, and more often businesses, realized that the game and its story didn't need to be good to be successful. It just needed to tick the boxes. If you had cute mascots, you could sell plushies. If it looked good enough, creators would play it or stream it. And if the story was cryptic enough, theorists would post about it. Now, I am by no means saying that every mascot horror game after 2023 was a shameless cash grab. We got some absolute bangers like Indigo Park, Don't Fret, Finding Frankie, Shipwreck 64, and many others. But for every good one we got, it felt like we got 2 low-quality games in return. I think Joyville is a prime example of this. The story is kind of a nothing burger. Everyone called it a Poppy Playtime ripoff from its designs to chase sequences, everything. And when we covered it, I remember seeing comments like, all mascot horror feels the same. It's all recycled. This isn't interesting anymore. People began to notice the problem. They began questioning if these games were really good or just made to sell plushies. Fatigue was setting in with the core audience, which led to less grace being given to new games. Sometimes they didn't even want to try a new game out of the fear that the same thing would happen. We saw views across the platform go down on these types of videos as fans became hyper-vigilant with their criticisms whenever something new hit the YouTube scene. This hyper-vigilance even applies to established franchises that fans already love.
This was a mess.
It was such a problem that calling a game mascot horror has become a bit of an insult to the game's quality, and people that are making games in this genre are trying desperately to stand out and not be called that, despite their games very clearly fitting into the original mascot horror genre. This is when you can start to see the decline in the numbers of mascot horror games. If everything released is low quality and uninspired, nobody's going to want to invest their time into it. That's not going to bring in any new fans, and that throws a wrench into the whole cycle. As audiences become less interested in the slop that is being released, they stop watching videos about them. And so, any creator wanting to keep the lights on had to find other things to post about. And with less people posting, these people and companies looking to make a quick buck moved on. They drained the mascot horror well dry, and it was time to find the next fad genre like Friend Slop, which I also love, by the way. It just has unfortunately garnered a rather derogatory name, but I also can't really call it anything else, so Friend Slop it is.
I'm gonna be going on to Whatnot to see how many Funko Pops I can buy with just $100. Let me bid $8. Let's.
So we've looked at the rise and the fall of the mascot horror genre, from its origins to the height of its power to the oversaturation and exploitation leading to audiences burning out. But at the beginning, I promised you a glimpse into the future. So based on what we've seen, what comes next? Well, I gotta say, on that front, the future, I think, is looking pretty bright. While there aren't a bunch of mascot horror games to play or talk about right this minute, I know there are a bunch of great games on the horizon. And do you know who is going to be leading the charge on this? Creators. Creators who saw the rise and fall of mascot horror. The ones who became full-time content creators because of these games. They remember the passion, the innovation that got them excited for these kinds of games all those years ago. And I'm not just saying that to try and big up my colleagues. We're already seeing this change in the film industry. YouTubers coming in and making waves that totally upend the traditional Hollywood model. Creators like Markiplier with Iron Lung, King Pixels with The Backrooms, Chris Stuckman with Shelby Oaks, and we're already seeing creators actually do it with mascot horror as well. I mentioned earlier, but a couple of years ago, we got Chapter 1 of Indigo Park, which was made by creator Unique Geese. That same year, we got a demo for Don't Fret, a game made by Rocket Music. Last year, I played a demo for Terrible Lizards at PAX West, thanks to the creators JT Music. These are all fantastic returns to form for the genre. They weren't just another reskinned FNAF or Poppy. They had unique mechanics and stories that felt truly innovative. But we haven't seen any real follow-up since then. How can they be the saviors of the genre if they've not been heard from in a year or two, especially when they've only been demos? Simple. Because there's a reason they're taking their time. And that reason is why audiences will be willing to put up with the wait. They're taking their time to focus on quality, not quantity. Passion, not profit. Innovation, not... I can't come up with a negative I. This was the reason the genre began to collapse, and so these guys are counteracting the stigma and frustrations with the genre by taking the time to make a truly new and high quality product that audiences will love. And to be clear, I'm not saying only creators are capable of this. I've been in talks with a number of indie devs who are working on their own games that, based on what I've seen, also fit into this new era of mascot horror. It's not about creators, it's about quality. It just so happens there's an interesting trend right now of creators deciding to pull a Thanos and do it themselves. There's actually one other creator that is a good friend of the channel that's working on a new game that I think will be a very very exciting experience, but I'll let you theorize in the comments who you think that is. But going forward, I think that this genre will begin to rise like a phoenix. The genre isn't dying, it's being reborn. The quality of the games will improve, and we'll have to deal with less bands making it to the top of the Steam charts. Although most of these games are coming out sometime this year, so I guess we won't have long to wait to see if I'm right. Which means in the meantime, all of this...
Hi, baby.
Hi, honey.
How you doing?
Just about to head home.
Sweet.
Yeah. Fucking 55 hours.
I'm sorry.
That's alright. What are you doing?
Playing some Sims and waiting for the washer to get done.
Alright. Do you mind putting away the dishes that are done?
Yep. I was just eating my breakfast.
Alright, well, I'll see you soon.
Okay, I love you.
Love you, beautiful.
I'm passing the phone to somebody who has a hard time focusing on even one menial task at a time.